whoever you are, wherever you are, hope you are blessed and doing safe. Ladies and gentlemen, greetings, family. Of course, I'm tuning in. You see me without the glasses off today, but if you're looking for some opportunities, particular advertisement opportunities, then look no further at the link at the bottom to my email address. You can hit me up for advertisement opportunities. We are supporting and promoting your businesses here on this channel. You can also, if you would like to donate and subscribe to our Patreon, a link is at the bottom as well. So you have multiple ways in which you can advertise with the platform by emailing me when we go on through our live stream. You also have access to premium content, those that want to see premium content that you will not find here on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, as I am suspended probably by now. You guys can check out the Patreon at link at the bottom. But advertisement opportunities, definitely email me, gavin.grich1@gmail.com for rates. And for the Patreon, it is the same as the YouTube channel. It is channel gboot2786. All right, I'll holla. Peace.
I'm attorney Gavin Richard. I grew up here in New Orleans, so I know how important family, friends, and community are to us. And helping others has been a lifelong passion of mine. If you've been injured in an accident, you may be out of work and faced with large medical bills. You'll need someone to fight the insurance companies so that you can get on with your life. Give me a call at 504-799-2288, and I'll be with you all the way. The law offices of Gavin M. Richard, going the distance so that justice may be served.
For many reasons, it's difficult to go back and read a book you wrote while typing its pages into a computer because you no longer have the electronic file. It's frustrating to find little mistakes in something you put together more than 2 decades ago after you've decided to leave them in and let the manuscript now stand on its own as an ebook. If I could rewrite the legacy of deception, it would come out better. Its tone would be less hesitant, and it would contain more information than it did in 1996. Back then, I published what I could publish and sent it out into the world. The manuscript was put together under all manner of restrictions and uncertainties, starting with the thought that at any moment, Michael Venner of Dove Books would pull the plug on the project, even though we had a signed contract. Venner was known for making sudden, erratic decisions, and in early October 1995, when OJ Simpson was acquitted by a jury that had deliberated for only a few hours, Venner, like so many other Americans, was in a state of shock and anger. He called and told me he was killing the book, which by now was all but written. I told him that I was getting on the next plane to LA and would be in his office soon after the flight had landed. We were going to have this out face to face. I don't think it would have occurred to him that Simpson would be found not guilty of the 2 murders he was accused of committing, or that the information I provided his defense team would be successfully used to help produce this legal result. To Venner and to other people I knew, my involvement in that case and my book were novelties and nothing more. Venner could publish the book as long as he could publish the book as long as Simpson was convicted, and everyone could agree that this was the right outcome. When OJ was set free, people were suddenly confronted with 2 choices. They could either examine they could either examine their own views, prejudices, and assumptions about the case, or they could blame the jury for being stupid and wrongheaded. The great majority of white Americans, including Michael Venner, chose the latter outcome. Now, this is a part of the introduction of Steven Singular's book, on the OJ Simpson case entitled Legacy of Deception. You see that at the top right corner of the screen. And this was a sample version that I was reading. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest. I want to give a shout out to a brother by the name of Garrett Gregory, who suggested I reach out to Mr. Singular. And Steve Singular is an author, of course, of over 25 books. I'm going to try and get him back on the phone. We just got cut off. But Steve is the author of all of these books that you see here, including Killer Cults, Stolen Future, The Untold Story of the 2000 Election, By Their Works, Terrell Owens' autobiography, Catch This, and also Presumed Guilty, an investigation into the John Benet Ramsey murder case. But for today's purposes, we will be talking about this book in particular, Legacy of Deception, an investigation of Mark Fuhrman and racism in the LAPD. I'm going to get Steve back on the phone, guys, in a minute, but I want you all to please give us a special round of applause to Mr. Singular in the chat as I get him on the phone. In the meantime, as you know, as we always do, hit that like, share, and subscribe button. If you could donate to the channel, please donate at the links at the bottom. We have the Cash App, Google Pay, and PayPal. And also, I would like for you, if you could, check out, of course, our seasoning company, Nawny'sCreoleBlends.com. Try it on chicken, meat, or fish. Nawny's goes great with every dish. Also, check out my latest tune, Video Soul, which is available at the iTunes Store and on Amazon. And like always, before we get on down, we got to get on up. So you can check that out as well on Amazon.com and Spotify if you'd like to stream it. So while I play the intro music, I'm going to try and get Steve back on the phone. So you guys stay tuned. Let's rock it.
Girl, come on. Gotta dance to the beat. Cause on the dance floor is where we'll be. Show me what you got. Gotta feel the groove.
Feel the groove, get on the floor. Get on the.
Right now the party's wasted. There's nothing much to do. But once the groove gets started, tell me, what do you have to lose? Just look into my eyes, girl, as we glide across the room. And what to my surprise now, the beat takes hold of you. Now if you're feeling like I'm feeling, so come on baby, let's start dealing. Time to get this party started. Ain't no time for the broken hearted. When the rhythm takes hold of you, there's only one thing left to do. Cause the beat is really moving. Time to get your body moving. Gotta get on up and move your body. Cause when the beat is really grooving, it's time to feel your body moving. Gotta get on up and shake something.
Feel the groove, get on the floor. Get on the.
Tell the DJ play the whispers. Rock steady in the mood. Put on earth, wind, and fire. Tonight we're gonna groove. Show me how you do the four corners. Electric slide or two. Hit the bus stop or do the bunny hop, baby. It's really up to you. Now if you're feeling like I'm feeling, so come on baby, let's start dealing. Time to get this party started. Ain't no time for the broken hearted. When the rhythm takes hold of you, there's only one thing left to do. Cause the beat is really grooving. Time to get your body moving. Gotta get on up and move your body. Cause when the beat is really grooving, it's time to feel your body moving. Gotta get on up and shake something.
Feel the groove, get on the floor. Get on the.
Now, 2020 hasn't been the best year of all times. We've been dealing with death, the pandemic, racism, bad policing, and all the bad rhymes. But like Uncle Snoop once said, if you breathe and you achieve. And so, if you're ready, I need you all to get on up. Are you ready? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Get your butt on the dance floor. 5 and 6 and 7, 8. This jam we appreciate. We're gonna slide and step on the beat. On the dance floor is where we'll be.
Feel the groove, get on the floor. Get on up
And move your body. Cause when the beat is really grooving, it's time to feel your body moving. Gotta get on up and shake something.
Feel the groove, get on the floor. Get on up,
Baby, yeah, gotta get on up. Come on, baby, gotta get on up. Baby.
feel the groove, get on the floor. Get on up.
Got to get on up. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Gavin Richard Presents, a special doubleheader. Today I have on Sean James later today. He is the author of over 70 books, including The Man Crisis. He'll be joining me as always on a Thursday night. And today I have on a special guest, Mr. Stephen Singular, who is the author of over 25 books, mostly in true crime. And we're going to be talking with him in regards to notorious case known as the OJ Simpson case that many of you are familiar with. And Steve is got Steve on the phone all the way from his home out in Denver, Colorado. And Steve is on speakerphone. So I want everybody, if you can hear Mr. Singular, I'll have him talk in a minute. Just let me know if you can hear him fine. Stephen, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for coming on. We appreciate you being on with us. Just want to see, can anyone hear Mr. Singular? If you can, please hit that in the chat box, just so I'll know that everything is all right with the audio. I can hear him fine, but I think we're okay. If you can't hear him, just let me know. Mr. Singular, again, is an author of over 25 books. The guests are saying, welcome, Mr. Singular, to you. Shout out to Steve Mack. He's a two-time New York Times best-selling author. And I was telling everyone some of the books you read. I mean, you've worked with some heavy hitters here, Stephen, including Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, NBA Hall of Famer, NFL Hall of Famer, Terrell Owens, ex-FBI profiler John Douglas. And your latest book was Killer Cults: Stories of Charisma, Deceit, and Death, which came out in September of last year. So, Steve, I gotta ask you, how do you write? How is it writing true crime now books?
Well, I started in 1984. Actually, I wasn't. I just sort of stumbled into doing this. I didn't really have a plan, but in 1981, I moved to Denver, and I grew up in a small town in eastern Kansas, and then I lived in New York City, and then I came here in September of 1981, and I heard this man on the radio named Alan Berg, who was very, very provocative and took on highly controversial issues, many of them about race, racism, anti-Semitism, serious subjects like that. He also did a lot of comedy, but I was really struck because I'd lived in New York and some other big cities, and I'd never heard anyone quite like him. So I decided to write about him for the Denver Post, the Sunday magazine of the Denver Post. And I wrote an article. I spent time with him in the studio and outside of the studio and got to know him a little bit. And the article came out in, I think, December of 1982. And then in June of 1984, he was gunned down in his driveway here in Denver on a late spring night. And initially, the police thought that some caller that he had tangled with on the radio, just one person, had probably gotten, very aggravated and ended up shooting him to death. But as it turned out, it was a much, much bigger story than that there was a group of neo-Nazis that had come into being in the Northwest in 1983, they went by the name of the Order, and the Order was actually based upon a group that was in a very racist, violently anti-Semitic novel that was written in 1978 by a man named William Pierce. And that novel became kind of the blueprint for the radical right, and it still is today. So this story has had a lot of legs, but they decided to start counterfeiting money, robbing banks, and eventually moved on to assassination. And they were going to assassinate some prominent Jewish Americans to start with that. So they decided on beginning with Berg, because one of the members of their group had lived in Denver and fought with Berg on the radio, or argued with Berg on the radio about race and all of that. So I just sort of stumbled into the true crime genre. This, again, I started writing that book in 1985, and it came out in 1987. It's called Talk to Death. And the Oliver Stone movie Talk Radio came out in 1989. And it is loosely based upon that book. This past summer, or spring and summer, a publisher contacted me about republishing Talk to Death, because there has been, most people know, a lot of activity on the radical right in recent years, culminating with the January 6th, whatever we want to call it, uprising in Washington, D.C. So the book is just about to come out again, and I've written an introduction that sort of covers the years from when it came out, 1987, to the present moment. So I found that in writing about true crime that I really liked it. I liked being in the courtroom, being around the prison system, being around lawyers, and I just kind of went from there. So
yeah, you don't have any intentions on being a lawyer, huh? Or did you?
What's that?
I said, did you have any intentions on being a lawyer?
No, I'm a writer. I would much prefer to do that. And most of what you see in the courtroom, I mean, it's very different from what you see on television, where it's all dramatic, and there's a whole lot of tedious stuff that goes on, and you get a lot of cases you don't like, and a lot of clients you don't like, but people do it for money, right? So no, I was drawn to observing it and always trying to kind of look for the bigger social issue or political issue that was in play in a case. I mean, in the Berg case, obviously it's racism and far right violence, and in other books it's been different things, but I always try to find something beyond just the crime itself to write about.
Most definitely. And you're right about that. I'm a lawyer myself, so it is not what everyone thinks it is on television. People think they can watch Law and Order and say, "Oh, I could go in a courtroom and defend myself and get found guilty on a misdemeanor."
Right.
Yeah, it's not as easy as it looks. There's a lot of work in it, but most definitely. And we got Garrick is in the rooms. He says good afternoon, as well as Vulcan to 2050 full. What's going on, everyone? Hit that like, share, and subscribe button. Here was Mr. Steven Singular. And Steven is from Emporia, Kansas. So he made it there all the way to Denver, Colorado, and New York, writing this book. And you talked about the book Talk to Death, Talk Radio. I had put it up for everyone. That was directed by Oliver Stone and released in 1988. And I know they got to change the names up for legal purposes. The character's name was Benny in the film was Barry Champlain, which was played by Eric Bogerson, who was actually in Law and Order.
Right, that's true.
I know him from Under Siege 2. He was the villain. Yeah. Just throwing that out there. But how we got here and why I wanted to bring Steven on was that I happened to, first off, I had your book for the last couple of years, and I have read it, and I have enjoyed it. And the book, of course, is called Legacy of Deception. And how I got your book was a gentleman by the name of Thomas Johnson. I don't know if you're familiar with him, But
Sure. Yes, I know Tommy. Yeah.
Yes, Thomas Johnson and his brother Henry Johnson are, I believe Henry Johnson is a close friend. I know Dr. Johnson. He's OJ Simpson's doctor and a friend of his, as well as Mr. Tommy Johnson has been working with his brother in investigating the OJ Simpson case for the last, I would say, 25 years. And in particular, to prove his innocence and explain how this was a big media hoax that mainstream media had been pushing, how they ignored certain things in the case. And Dr. Johnson's book is called Double Cross for Blood. Now, how I got to listening and learning about Legacy of Deception, Steve, was that Tommy was on a talk show via radio. I think he was calling in with his brother, and he explained how in your book you detailed what Mark Fuhrman's role was in this case, about the planting of evidence and how the blood got into, but in particular, not just the glove, but also the so-called blood on the bloody Bronco that even some eyewitnesses had testified they didn't even witness. So I'm going to get into that. But how it all starts up now is that last week, if for those that may not know, or if you remember, on Saturday Night Live, Kim Kardashian happened to be hosting the program. And in her monologue, she had made references to OJ Simpson, in particular, some jokes about him while hosting. And she states, and I quote, her father, Robert Kardashian, who was actually on the defense team, stated that he was the reason she met her first, quote, first black person. And she says, want to take a stab in the dark at who it was.
Right.
And she said,
right, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I pity anyone that still watches Saturday Night Live, but
yeah.
It's
yeah. No, I didn't see the program, but I read an article about that. So,
right.
Well, that typifies everything about this case. That somebody who knows absolutely nothing about it. This was true from the very beginning, and it's really the sort of significance of it beyond just the trial itself and all of that. But it was really the first time where cable television was really coming on, strong at that point. They're obviously
right.
looking for content. And I mean, that was MSNBC and Fox and all of the rest of them. And so they immediately, jumped on this case. Raul Rivera, among others, who considers himself,
Nancy
I'm sure,
Grace.
probably a liberal, and looked at the Bronco chase and all of that, and jumped to the conclusion that OJ was guilty and broadcast that around the clock for the next 2 years or so, and poisoned the entire media and general population's view of what the case is. And many of those people, were promoted for doing what they did. They made millions of dollars. They went on to media stardom. So to me, it's really a turning point in the culture. I mean, you'll obviously have, racism and all of those things, police misconduct before this, but you didn't have such a media push behind it.
Right.
So, 27 years later, you get somebody like Kim Kardashian making a comment about it, which is reprehensible in my view. So, that's showbiz. It has nothing to do with due process, evidence, testimony, cross-examination. I mean, the principles that we all, as Americans, claim to believe in and to defend so strongly and to support, were violated from the very beginning of this case and continue to be today. So we have never taken anything approaching a hard look at ourselves around this case, which is probably the most important criminal case in American history.
Yes, most definitely. You're right about that. And, the media hype that surrounds it, we see that the OJ Simpson case really, I don't want to say it started off the media frenzy on high profile murder cases, because there were some obviously before that, like Menendez brothers and, you had the Sam Shepard case up in Ohio. But I think this one, why it's so memorable, was the fact that for the first time, everybody could watch a trial from home.
Yep.
having the cameras inside there. And, I watched that trial religiously as a kid because I saw, me as a young Black American boy, I got to see Johnny Cochran in action. And so many of us, and he was brilliant in that case, but as well as some of the other lawyers like F. Lee Bailey and Barry Scheck.
Yeah.
But in getting in with Legacy Deception, I was reading the book and the intro, and you talked about how you had trouble even trying to get that published. Mr. Venner, Michael Venner, was trying to prevent you even from publishing that book when you started the even when you finished your first draft of it.
Well, what happened, I mean, this is a complicated story, but I got involved in the case in the first week of August of 1994. Now, the murders happened on June 12th, 1994, so this approximately 6 to 7 weeks later. I was contacted by someone in the legal system within Los Angeles,
right,
whom I had previously known from working on my first book, Talk to Death. Talk to Death was, clearly about, racists and racism and people who commit violence in the name of that. And I was really shocked when I was contacted because I was living in Denver. The case is 1,200 miles away in Los Angeles. I didn't have anything to do with it. And said that, the kinds of people that I had written about in Talk to Death, starting 10 years earlier, there were people like that who were much closer inside the system now and had more power within it. And I didn't accept this at face value or think that there was anything to it necessarily, but the person I was talking to, the source, was a very credible person. And I couldn't just dismiss the thought.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote up a fax and I sent it out to Johnny Cochran's office. And it took a couple of days to get through, but I gave them 4 pieces of information that I had been given, none of which was public information at that time. And the first 2 pieces of information, the first piece of information was that Mark Fuhrman, the detective who claimed to have found the glove on Simpson's property, had some sort of relationship with Nicole Simpson prior to the murders. I'm not saying they were intimate, but that there was a connection there that was more than was publicly known. And when I presented this to Johnny Cochran's second in command, lawyer Carl Douglas, and his private investigator, they told me I was wrong, that was not true. Then I told them that there were 2 pieces of evidence taken from Simpson's property that were in evidence at the LAPD, which was a broken piece of stick and a blue plastic evidence bag. And they said that those things didn't exist. And my source was trying to mislead me, and I was trying to mislead them, and all of this was completely bogus. And then I told them the 4th piece of information, which was by far the most important, which was that when blood is collected from a suspect, as it was from Simpson on the afternoon of June 13th, 1994, after he flew back from Chicago, once he had learned that his ex-wife had been murdered, that blood is stored in a particular kind of vial in order to be preserved so it can be tested for EDTA or tested for DNA or matched to a blood sample taken from a crime scene or anything like that. So if you were, for example, a defendant and they collected blood against you, it's a little complicated maybe for the audience, but it's critical to understanding the case. If they collected blood samples against you, and you could determine that the compound, the preservative EDTA, is in those samples, that can only mean one thing: that blood did not come out of your body on the time of the crime, that it is not genuine evidence, but it had to come out of that vial and be sprinkled around and then collected against you in the case. On the afternoon of June 13th, there were 8 milliliters of blood taken from Simpson.
Right.
He went in. I mean, let's set the scene a little bit. You know, you're going to be accused of murder. The allegations are that you killed 2 people with a knife, that you cut your hand in the process, that you left blood everywhere at the crime scene and at your home and inside your vehicle. He goes to the police voluntarily. He doesn't ask to have a lawyer. He asks a bunch of questions at that time that indicate very strongly that he didn't know how the crime was committed. And so, 8 milliliters of blood was taken from him at that time. And when that blood was entered into evidence, there were 6.5 milliliters of blood. So you can do the math on that one. There was 1.5 milliliters of blood that were missing from that vial. And as significant as that one of the lead detectives, Philip Van Adder, took the blood sample from Simpson. Standard procedure is that you, as a police officer, detective, you take samples of blood and you enter them into the evidence room in Los Angeles. It's called the Parker Center. And it's called a chain of custody. And it goes from the police to the storage room, et cetera, et cetera. That's not what happened in this case. When I told Carl Douglas and his private investigator that blood sample had been tampered with, they told me that I was completely wrong, that I was lying to them or doing something. I had no motive to lie, but I was trying to mislead them. Then we saw about 2 weeks later that there was testimony from criminalists inside the LAPD that Van Adder had taken that vial, that he'd gone back to the crime scene, and that he had been in his pocket or on his person for about 4 hours that afternoon, and then it was turned into evidence. So the vial is not following the chain of custody. The vial's in his pocket, and blood is missing from that vial.
And that's important to remember.
When I told them that story,
Steve.
Then they discovered that, I began to have some credibility.
Hold a second, Steve. What you say is correct, and I want people to understand, because you mentioned a very important word, chain of custody. And that's something in the law that we follow, where when evidence is collected at a crime scene, that evidence is always, or should be always, marked by whoever discovered it first. They sign and date for it. If they have to take it out, they still have to sign. That person has to still sign and date for it, because that way no one can claim, especially if they don't want the defense attorney to raise an argument that, well, wait a minute, this evidence was not properly obtained in a chain of custody. So and there may be issues with it being, of course, they may raise a 4th, 5th amendment on it, basically saying that this was tampered evidence and try and get the whole case thrown out, or fruit of the poisonous tree, as we call it. If you have something that, for instance, even if you had proof that from a confession that a person did commit a crime, and the cops go to that crime scene and actually find the body and the evidence that the person gave in the confession, if the confession was not voluntary, let's say the police beat that person up in doing that, then that would be a fruit of the poisonous tree, because confessions have to always be voluntary and willfully made, and the person has to have knowledge of it. So it's very vital. But what you're hearing and talking about, Steve, Steve was, I stopped you. You also tried to get this information. When I read the book, you actually called into Robert Shapiro's office first, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. And I had an 800 line, and I left a message, and I didn't hear back. I didn't expect to. But when I hooked up with Carl Douglas, things began to change. And once I gave him these 4 pieces of information, and he demanded that I tell him where they came from, and I wouldn't do that because I had the source that I was working with, standard journalistic, stuff.
Journalistic privilege. Yeah.
So they found the stick and the bag in the evidence room. They were not aware of those things. I was told that the stick was taken from a piece of fence, from a fence at Nicole Simpson's condo on the night of the crime, that it was used to pick up the glove, the second glove that was at the crime scene at Nicole's condo, that the glove was placed into a blue plastic evidence bag, which police officers have on them, and that the stick and the bag were transported over to Simpson's, and that the glove was placed where it was found near Cato Kaelin's bungalow, and with that walkway that was there, and that Fuhrman had gone there. He talked to Cato. Cato told him a story about hearing some thumps on the wall. And then Fuhrman went back, and I was told, again, I'm using that phrase here because this is what was told to me. I didn't know if it was true or false, but I followed it where it led. And the glove is found in that location, and the bag is on the other side of a chain link fence there. I was told it was discarded, and the stick is out by the Bronco where it was parked that night.
Mm-hmm.
So I was also told, and this is a critical part of the story, and it's not generally known, that Fuhrman did not make one trip over to the Rockingham estate of Simpson that night, but he made two.
Correct.
At about 3 a.m, he and someone, another police officer, it might have been his partner, might have been someone else, he talked this person into going over there and looking for evidence because he was absolutely convinced that they would find something. And they went over there and they didn't find anything, but they got into an argument about, you're not supposed to leave a crime scene under these circumstances. At that point, he was the senior detective on the case. This is about 3 a.m, and they didn't find anything. So then they go back, and then I'm told about the stick and the bag, that occurred. And then when the two other more senior detectives show up, Dan Adder and Lang, then he talks them into going back to Simpson's, because this time he said, I'm sure we'll find some evidence. And so if you follow it very carefully, they go back, they jump over the fence, to get into the estate, and then he parks the other three officers. I think it's Ron Phillips, as I recall, and then Adder and Lang, he parks them in the house with Simpson's daughter, and then he goes out and, allegedly finds this glove. And that effectively, and this again, another very important part, is that effectively closes the investigation. So, you have two victims, you have all kinds of complexities that would apply in a normal case if you were going to do an actual murder investigation. Which one of these victims is the primary victim, for example? You can't just make the assumption that it's one or the other. And what are their connections and what led up to this, and all of the things that go into law enforcement. When he finds that glove, the case is over, and everybody gets on board behind it. So you're talking about, the complete and absolute derailing of a murder investigation about 6 hours after it happened.
Yes.
6 or 7.
Yes.
And the rest just goes downhill from there.
Most definitely. And what's in the book too, you even stated that Fuhrman had admitted that when he was at the crime scene, I'm talking about the murder scene with Nicole, where Nicole and Ron were, he initially said he found 2 gloves, but then changed it to one glove there.
He refers in his preliminary hearing testimony in June of '94. A few weeks after the murders, he said he refers to the gloves as them. Obviously a plural pronoun, referring to multiple gloves. And then he changes his testimony after that. He slips up over and over again. If you were to study his preliminary hearing testimony, for example, he says that he's very well aware that OJ and Nicole have joint custody of their children, and he makes some other comments about it. That's not generally known to everybody. So go back to the 4 essential pieces of information: that there is a stick, there is a bag. It will be shown through testing that there is EDTA in the blood samples collected against Simpson, and the ones that they chose to actually examine. And then because there was such a stink around Fuhrman from all of these various things in his racism, his background, and all of that.
And he was a neo-Nazi
The
sympathizer.
LAPD did an internal affairs investigation of Fuhrman, and starting in early 1995, as the trial was going on, and he had told numerous people, DA's office, etc., other people, that he had seen Nicole Simpson's breast up close and personal. So that's the fourth piece of information, that he had some sort of connection with her beyond having arrived at OJ's home in 1987, I believe, when there was a domestic situation there. So that was 4 for 4, and that was kind of the start of my involvement in it. Cochran and Douglas asked me to go into the crime lab in October of 95 and try to find out what had been done with Simpson's blood after it had been collected. That was a virtually impossible thing for anybody to do. I made an attempt, and it didn't really go anywhere. So I wrote a book proposal. These are all the things that the public doesn't know anything about that came out in that I wrote in late October of 1994, because I wanted to write about this case, and it was leaked. The publisher leaked it to the defense attorneys, Johnny Cochran's office, Shapiro's office, and they leaked it to the district attorney's office. And at the time, I thought it was the worst possible thing that could happen, because I didn't want that kind of exposure, and it was just supposed to be for the publisher to see if some sort of book could be developed from this. But it forced the district attorney's office to face this allegation that blood had been planted. And I don't know if that would have happened without that. So the trial started in January, and in February of 95, Judge Ito, or the prosecutors, asked Judge Ito to bring in the FBI to test this allegation that there was this substance in the blood. This is an absolutely critical part of this case. The prosecution asked the judge in writing to, and this is a quote, to refute the possibility of this substance being in the blood. Not to examine the blood to see if it's there, but to refute the possibility. That's very important language. In other words, deny this. So the judge brings in the FBI. The FBI runs their tests in March or April for EDTA, and the prosecutors do not call the FBI as witnesses. So for you people who like true crime out there, this is as good as it gets. They call them in to prove there's no EDTA there, and then they can't call their witnesses because the FBI found EDTA in the blood. The defense calls the FBI, and they testify to this. So the phrase used in the courtroom was consistent with. There's something in the blood consistent with EDTA. So I think you can speak to this as a lawyer better than I can, but when evidence in a case has clearly been planted, I would tend to think that would cast doubt on the other evidence collected in the case.
Yes, it would. It certainly would. You could move immediately based off of this for a motion for dismissal, prejudicial, or at the least a mistrial. But I don't think you could claim a mistrial because at that point in the prosecutor's case in chief, they've introduced evidence that was tampered with. So the case should be dismissed with prejudice. Now, the next question is that if they found EDTA present in the blood, and Marcia Clark, I'm going to bring this up later, if they did find the EDTA in the blood, and by the way, your blood does not contain EDTA. If it did, you would die. You do have white blood cells, which helps with, you do have natural cells in the body that does prevent clotting and so forth. And what's that done? The EDTA we're talking about, that's used to preserve the blood. My mother worked as a lab technician for over 24 years with the Veterans Affairs Department. She worked for the VA. And I can tell you, Steve, when we were watching the trial, when they talked about EDTA, she immediately knew what it was. My mother knew immediately, oh, they planted that shit. So they knew. And Marsha Clark tried to say this. I don't know if you've watched any of these OJ Simpson documentaries like OJ Made in America, but but she said that the EDTA was present because of laundry detergent. I don't know if you saw that. And to that you would say BS.
It was present, but it was in the blood on the back gate at Nicole's condo. So I doubt if they put that iron fence in the washing machine.
Right. And plus the bloody sock, the way that the symmetry of it, it looked like someone poured a vial in it. And there was a video of when they went into OJ's bedroom, and I believe at one point you didn't see the sock, but then all of a sudden they turn it and you see the socks there. So someone was planning it. It probably was, if I had to guess, and Judge Joe Brown even said this on the video, you could hear them tell Detective Fuhrman, please leave, or something along those lines.
Yeah. So all of this came out in the trial. People didn't necessarily connect the dots on all of that. But here's the evidence of how my glove was moved, where it was put, how it was transported, what it was in, all of those things. Here's evidence, clear evidence of blood being planted from the defendant's blood vial, not taken from his body on the night of the crime. And then, of course, the jury acquits Simpson at lightning speed, and the end result is that everybody blames the jury. So, it's remarkable that, like you just made a reference to Made in America, if that's what it was called, those shows don't talk to people like me,
Right.
They don't.
You've never been asked to do an interview with them, like never even the FX series, the True Story, was it True American Crime Story? They never reached out to you?
No, I was interviewed I was called by CNN once, and I told the producer more or less, what I'm telling you.
Mm-hmm.
And his response to me was, how much money do you want for this? And I was like, dude, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I'm not asking you for money. I'm asking you to report what happened here, the facts, what the American public doesn't know. So the thrust of what I was writing and the source of it was, from the source's point of view, giving me the information. It wasn't so much just to maybe help Simpson in his situation, but to talk about police racism, to talk about police violence, to talk about these racist attitudes, etc. Now, so I ask you, how many, and that was completely dismissed. I couldn't, nobody wanted to hear that. I mean, I went to, one time my name came up in the courtroom because of the leaked book proposal, and then the next couple of days I was contacted by, I think, 19 major news organizations, and I told them parts of this story, and I said, watch how this blood issue is going to play out in the trial, because it's going to be important. And nobody ever called back. The blood plays out in the courtroom. They find the EDTA. The FBI has to fess up to that. Simpson's acquitted, and nobody ever called back. Mm-hmm. So, but the CNN producer was, how much money do you want? And I just went off, It's like, you're the biggest news organization electronic news organization in the world, and you don't give a damn about what happened in this case. You cannot hear anything new. So how many cases in the subsequent 27 years, quarter of a century, how many headlines about police violence? How many headlines about police shootings? How many headlines about police racism? How many headlines about corruption and the planning of evidence? You know, that was the larger purpose in trying to write about this, is to shed some light on it.
Right.
And get people maybe to have a different discussion, that just because you're looking at something on television, you know, like a distraught man whose wife has just been murdered, maybe you can't jump to conclusions. You know, again, everything in our legal system is based upon the notion of due process. And due process worked here. I mean, we should get down on our knees and thank the founding fathers for creating a system in which everything in the world can be against you. But if the evidence falls apart, you get acquitted. That's a damn good system to have. That's worth defending, right? And it worked. And the American public has just learned nothing from this. So Kim Kardashian can go on television 27 years later and make jokes about it. And that's the definition of success in our society. I mean, someday somebody with some, stones and money will try to tell this story on a larger scale, because it needs to be told. All you have to do is trace the blood evidence. That's all that it needs to be done. From the moment Simpson came back from Chicago, to when the blood was drawn, to what happened with it after that, to what happened to it with the FBI, to what happened with it in the trial. And when the jurors acquitted him and came out, they talked about, one or two talked about this issue. Obviously, there were other issues. I'm not saying this is the only one. The timeline fell apart and other things happened, but we don't know our history, so we just keep repeating it, and this is a great learning opportunity for the United States, and it was completely buried. So that's my story.
Most definitely was completely buried. And unfortunately, we as Americans keep repeating the same mistakes, because we saw it with the Michael Jackson case. We saw it with even Bill Cosby's case, what was going on, and how our prejudices can often get in the way of real justice when we're so busy and hell-bent on believing the propaganda that's pushed on mainstream media. And that's what happened with you with CNN. They were more interested in pushing propaganda than reporting news, unfortunately. And sadly, that's the state of our news media as we see it at this point. But I do want to point, because I know you got to run in a little bit, but I do have just two quick questions I want to ask you first. Could you explain for those, especially about the blood outside the Bronco? Because I believe in your book, you pointed out the key testimony of 4 individuals, even the tow truck driver, I believe his name is Ernie Durrell, who got inside the Bronco, as well as the impound detective at the LAPD.
Right. The name that I recall was Kelly Muldorfer. Right. I believe Kelly is a woman, and her testimony was that, when a suspect is taken into custody, the vehicle is impounded. The place is called Vertel's. That's the impound facility, and they were in that car, right after this happened, and they didn't see blood. They did not see evidence of blood. When I met with Carl Douglas in October of '94, he brought out what's called the murder book, which is all the photos of evidence or potential evidence or fabricated evidence in this case. And he showed me the console of the Bronco, and it was smeared with blood. And you're not, as a police officer, you're not going to not see that when you're, looking at a potential, huge piece of evidence. So I was told from the beginning that every piece of the blood in this case was suspect, that all of it was. And that includes at the crime scene, that includes at Simpson's home, and that includes the car. So I don't know the details of everything that happened. There could have been multiple people involved, beyond Fuhrman. There are lots of things I don't know, but we know enough to know that the facade of this case is not the reality behind it. And we could learn so much about our culture if we would stop for a moment and think about, how powerful the media is to persuade people that the surface of things. I mean, I read about crime for 35 years. You're a lawyer. Some things are just very complicated. Not everything is, but you can't take this at face value the surface of very complicated crimes. Nobody looked at Ron Goldman in this case. Nobody looked at his story. Nobody looked at his background.
Right.
Nobody wanted to pursue the fact that he had a friend in 1993 named Bet Cranner who got his throat slit from ear to ear.
Right.
Or that
Michael
in 1995 he had a friend named Michael Nigg who's from Colorado who got shot to death in the parking lot.
Right.
Nobody wanted to pursue the notion that there are three young guys who, within a space of 2 years, were all violently killed in somewhat similar circumstances, and they're all three unsolved murders.
Yes, and they were connected to that restaurant.
Homicide investigation worth its name would have looked at both victims, would have dug into their backgrounds, would have looked at the circumstances that they worked in, would have looked at their social connections, would have looked at their finances. This is just 101 stuff.
Yeah.
It never happened.
This is
so
detective work.
If it had, who knows?
Yes, and what you say is right about Brett Cantor and Michael Nigg, but also if you read Double Cross for Blood, that those that have not, by Dr. Henry Johnson, they talk about Ron Goldman and how he was actually an informant up in California for the police department, and he got busted with cocaine. Now, it doesn't, of course, it doesn't. That doesn't mean that he or Nicole deserved to die the way they did.
No, absolutely not.
But that part of that life, sadly, that's a consequence with some of those things. And, the connection with Faye Resnick as well. F. Lee Bailey even talked about that before he died. I don't know if you ever reached out to him before.
No, but I know people who did. I mean, he was kind of a tough guy in some ways to interview. I mean, based upon what I've been told, there were people who reached out to him with some of the information that I worked with in the case, and he, but I think his instincts about the case were right. He said right after the acquittal, he said, "You want to solve the case, put $5 million on the street, and somebody might talk to you." And I think that's the kind of case that this was and is. And, when it was over in October of 94 or 5, I called Darden's office, Christopher Darden, and said, "Here are some things I think you should look into." And now that Mr. Simpson is acquitted, man, he just sort of laughed and hung up.
Yeah, and he even wrote, I have this article in your book from your website, his bestseller, In Contempt. Darden wrote that this to say about the proposal: "I was basically looking at a blueprint of OJ Simpson's defense months before it became operational." Clearly, this guy, Singular, had spent more than a brief moment with Simpson's attorneys, Cochran and Douglas. Singular was writing about information that hadn't been made public at the time he wrote his treatment. Later, I would wonder how much Simpson had paid for a defense that really came from a true crime writer. This is what Darden had to say. The last question I did want to ask you, Steve, then, if you have all of this information, and obviously it's made public as well, what we saw at the trial, why then is it that you have this, I guess, OJ did it industry that continues to say he did it, it doesn't matter about EDTA, it doesn't matter about evidence being planted, or he did it? I remember Bill Maher said something very insulting, where he said the reason why OJ got acquitted was because Mark Fuhrman said the N-word, which was not true. What Johnny Cochran did was play the credibility card. But people have that. People, I guess, are entitled to believe what they believe. But when you just outright dismiss facts like that,
well, when I was here's my kind of long answer probably, but when I was a boy, my dad was a prisoner of war in Germany in World War II. And so I kind of grew up with a fascination with World War II. And like many people, I, looked at it and I kind of said, how does this happen? How do you take a nation of people and who have contributed so much to culture and the arts and all that and turn them into savages? How does that happen? And I couldn't answer that question until, I went through the OJ case. And the simple two-word answer is that propaganda works. It works on smart people. It works on people who aren't so smart. It works on all kinds of people cutting across all sort of lines, because it affects us, at emotional levels, and it affects us on conscious levels, and it just simply works. And to combat that is an extremely difficult thing. And then if you add onto that you can also sell it. I mean, that's what the whole industry is about. That's what the CNN guy was talking to me about. I can't sell your story. I can't sell this information to the people above me or whoever it was. You're going against the dominant narrative, and we can't sell that. People. I did a really good interview with the Reels Network,
right?
And they actually did a very, very good show on this, the best probably I've ever seen. And they talked in specifics about what I'm telling you, which most people don't. And they got to the end of it, and they said, well, all of these things are true, but in the end, OJ's guilty. I mean, you've got to stick your neck out a little bit to change the conversation. You've got to open that up a little bit to fight back. And I just feel like, in speaking to you, speaking to others, we have sort of an obligation to fight against propaganda when it's very divisive and destructive. Because if this had really been exposed in 1995, when it came out about Fuhrman and his, think about where my story starts. I'm contacted by somebody that says there are people in the LAPD and other metropolitan police departments that are held views that are similar to those of the people who killed Alan Berg. Well, Fuhrman, from what I read, was a collector of Nazi paraphernalia. He used, incredibly vicious racial slurs throughout his time in the LAPD. He bragged about beating up minority people until his pants were soaked with their blood. I mean, this is all in a psychiatric report for anybody who wants to read it. And then the murder weapon for Alan Berg, the murder weapon that killed Alan Berg, was discovered by the FBI 4 months to the day after his assassination in a home near Sandpoint, Idaho, which was a sort of a known enclave for white supremacists and people with those beliefs. When Fuhrman left the LAPD, where do you think he moved? Sandpoint, Idaho. So it was it just goes down note for note, that I was told that this stuff is going on. And when I looked into it, everything I told was true. Everything played out just like that. And I took this story to the New York Times. I took it to the LA Times, the networks, the CNN. It's just they can't hear anything new. And I think beyond any question, there's a racial element to that.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just they're for the most predominantly white managed people who just say, well, I know what happened, and that's the end of the story. They don't have experience with the police much. they've never been abused or accused of a crime they didn't commit or roughed up or et cetera, et cetera. And there's just no, for me, there's been no real ability to penetrate that wall. So again, I appreciate you having me on. I've gone on a number of shows and tried to talk about this, and I appreciate Tommy and Doc Johnson, for the work that they're doing and have done. And you just have to chip away at the wall. It seems to me, right or wrong, that younger people are more open to alternative ideas and explanations.
Yeah.
I hope that's true. I don't know if it is, but with all of the new media podcasts, YouTube, et cetera, where you can disseminate information more easily and more widely, you just keep telling your story, and you keep telling your story. And, maybe someday somebody will put some muscle behind it, and the American public will get more of the truth. And it would serve us greatly to do that, because we have to look at our own behavior, in these kinds of circumstances, that we just presume people to be guilty. We just throw away their rights. We just, again, as I started to say, we don't value the actual due process that is such, an important heritage of our culture. When you go around the world, there are all kinds of places that don't have that. So we should celebrate, when it works like this.
Right, most definitely. And Steve, what you're saying is 100% right. That's why we have media like myself, New Black Media. Shout out to Taisha Essex and Garrett Gregory who are watching. Shout out to Nicole Few and all of the other my Sean James, all of my YouTubers out here who are about the truth and pushing for it. And I see, if I'm not mistaken, just before you go, Stephen, that is it true you and your wife Joyce, as well as your son, you all are working on a book together or a project?
Well, we've been writing a screenplay that has basically to do with alternative energy. It's not exactly nonfiction. It's a fictional project, but we've written a screenplay around that, and it's in LA, and it's in what called it's in development, and hopefully one day it will be produced, and that would probably give me more visibility, and then maybe I could do more with the things that are I feel very passionately about, like everything we've been talking about this afternoon. So it's all connected, and hopefully some of these things will come out in time and be more accepted.
Most definitely. And thank you. I look forward to that screenplay. And I'll let you know also, I'm an author as well. I've written my first book on Katrina, because being from New Orleans was my first book. I'm actually working on a second book that I've completed, and everybody I've talked about, it's on the Bill Cosby case. So when it's available, I look forward to sending you a copy of it. And
good. I would really appreciate that. Yeah.
Yes. Well, Steve.
Okay. Well,
I won't keep you. I appreciate you being on here. And by the way, what you were talking about too about those officers, that was the Rampart scandal, I believe. That
yes, that's correct.
That were involved in that. Remember, Judge Joe Brown even said those people that were tied with that scandal were tied with the OJ case. So, shout out to Judge Joe Brown. All right, Steve, thank you.
If I could, if people are interested in this book again, which is called Legacy of Deception, or other books I've written, they can go to StephenSingular.com, and that's StephenSingular.com, and they can look at some of the other books if they want to. So.
Yes, I do. I have your website posted here. Everybody can see it. And actually, Stephen, I know you can't see it, but if you looked on a computer, people are actually putting it in the chat, so everyone can get it. Shout out to Black Voltron, because he's actually has your link to your website where to get Legacy of Deception. So
that's great.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me on, Gav.
Thank you, Stephen. I'd love to have you come back on too on another day.
Okay. I would be happy to do it.
All right. You take it easy.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. All right, guys. That was that was a good one, huh? Mr. Steven Singular. More and more of this to come, guys. This is why I ask you all to please. This is not easy to do. We thank you to Steven Singular for coming on out, but this is not easy to do, to take to bring on guests like Mr. Singular. I wanted to bring him on though, so you guys could have specifically a difference in opinion about this matter and hear why the mainstream media chooses to ignore it. And this is a white man too who wrote that book about legacy of deception and racism in the LAPD, what Mark Fuhrman did and his cohorts. This is why I ask you guys to please donate, because when we put the content out here, great content, it takes time and effort to do so, and it pulls, when YouTubers are asking sometimes for donations, it's because it does take time from our work days, but the information needed to come out. And that was the main thing. Some people didn't know Steven Singular. Some people didn't know about Legacy of Deception. So he came out and spoke. This is somebody I never met, for an hour to sit with us and talk over the phone about his case and his role, his role in it, and how he essentially broke the case before anybody else. Of course, he had his sources, but he had the mode. He knew already who was behind this, the who, the what, the why, and what their motive was. Who was behind, these police officers, Mark Fuhrman in particular. And it's an easy read. Go ahead and check out the book Legacy of Deception. You can actually order that on Kindle. Yes, thank you, Black Voltron. Please donate to the Cash App. So if you like what you hear in this content, I ask that you please donate. Now, this is the first head. Now we got a second double header that's coming up in another 2.5 hours. I will have on Brother Sean James, as we will discuss, less than 2.5 hours. I will have Sean James as we discuss random topics. So if you all enjoyed this live stream, hit that like, share, and subscribe button. I want you to go to Amazon, buy Legacy of Deception. He also has a book I want to talk about later called Presumed Guilty, which is on the John Benet Ramsey murder case. And that happened up in Colorado, where Stephen is from. But you guys ought to check that out. Go to his website, stevensingular.com. I will let you know too in advance when my book is ready. I'm pushing for a Halloween release of the Bill Cosby book. It's not in stone, but pretty soon I will eventually have a trailer for you all. Don't tell me when. I won't tell you when, but it will be available soon. And I will definitely let you know when the book is available. You can go purchase it. It's just in the final editing and approval stages as we speak. So I can't wait for that to come out. But anyway, guys, you all be safe and be blessed. Shout out to everyone in the chat. Bossa Queenie, Vulcan. I see you, Black Voltron, who's always on here. Brother Black Voltron. Voltron, did I make you? Hold on a second. I want to see. Did I make Black Voltron a moderator? I believe he is. No, he's not. Hold on. We're going to change that. So, oh, wait. Yeah, he is. Okay. Yeah. See, I'm already, I feel great already because Tariq's got you as a mod, and I think you're a mod on the Black Authority. So, all right. Bossa Queenie, is it Bossa Queenie or Butterflies? One of y'all are out there in Colorado, if I'm not mistaken. But shout out to Lamiko. Shout out to y'all. So y'all tune in another 2 hours. I'll be on with Sean, and it'll be a doozy. All right. All right, guys. But check out Steve Singular's book. Thank him for coming on. Thank you all for being here. You all be safe and be blessed. And also, I guess we can go on and get on up. But check out Video Soul. Check out Honest Creole Blends. And we'll go ahead and get on out of here. But before we get on out of here, we're gonna go and get on up. So I will see you all in 2 hours. All right, guys? I'll holla. Peace.
Girl, come on. Gotta dance to the beat, cause on the dance floor is where we'll meet. Show me what you got. Gotta feel the groove.
Feel the groove, get on the floor. Get on the.
Right now the party's wasted. There's nothing much to do. But once the groove gets started, tell me, what do you have to lose? Just look into my eyes, girl, as we glide across the room. And what to my surprise now, the beat takes hold of you. Now if you're feeling like I'm feeling, so come on baby, let's start dealing. Time to get this party started. Ain't no time for the broken hearted. When the rhythm takes hold of you, there's only one thing left to do. Cause the beat is really moving. Time to get your body moving. Gotta get on up and move your body. Cause when the beat is really grooving, it's time to feel your body moving. Gotta get on up and shake something.
Feel the groove, get on the floor. Get on the.
Tell the DJ play the whispers. Rock steady in the mood. Put on earth, wind, and fire. Tonight we're gonna groove. Show me how you do the four corners. Electric slide or two. Hit the bus stop or do the bunny hop, baby. It's really up to you. Now if you're feeling like I'm feeling, so come on baby, let's start dealing. Time to get this party started. Ain't no time for the broken hearted. When the rhythm takes hold of you, there's only one thing left to do. Cause the beat is really grooving. Time to get your body moving. Gotta get on up and move your body. Cause when the beat is really grooving, it's time to feel your body moving. Gotta get on up and shake something.
Feel the groove, get on the floor. Get on the.
Now 2020 hasn't been the best year of all times. We've been dealing with death, the pandemic, racism, bad policing, and all the bad rhymes. But like Uncle Snoop once said, if you breathe and you achieve. And so if you're ready, I need you all to get on up. Are you ready? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Get your butt on the dance floor. 5 and 6 and 7, 8. This jam we appreciate. We're gonna slide and step on the beat. On the dance floor is where we'll meet.
Feel the groove, get on the floor. Get on up
And move your body. Cause when the beat is really grooving, it's time to feel your body moving. Gotta get on up and shake something.
Feel the groove, get on the floor. Get on
Oh, baby, yeah, gotta get on up. Come on, baby, gotta get on up. Baby,
Feel the groove, get on the floor. Get on up.
yeah, gotta get on up. Come on, baby, gotta get on up. Baby,
Feel the groove, get on the floor. Get on up.